Hello, today we're going to be making Stromboli, which is a rolled pizza. We need to do two things before we start. Firstly, we need to put the oven on, so that's 210 degrees C, or if you're using a fan oven, 190 degrees C. And then we need to line our baking tray, so you need a nice flat baking tray like that. Cut yourself a bit of baking parchment. If you were doing this at school, I would have done that for you, but you're doing it at home, so you're going to have to do it yourselves. Pop that aside and then get yourself your bowl and your scales. So in our bowl we're going to put our salt, our sugar and our yeast, and if you were doing this in school you'd come into the classroom and it would be done ready for you, but you're going to have to do it yourself. The important thing to remember is not to mix these ingredients until we're ready. So 1/4 teaspoon of salt in the bowl, 1/2 teaspoon of sugar separately in the bowl, and then 1 teaspoon of yeast. Now if you look in your recipe book it says easy blend yeast or fast action yeast. Don't use the kind of yeast you have to mix with warm water in order to activate. You need this easy blend yeast, and we want a teaspoon of yeast, and it's important when you put it in the bowl to keep it away from the salt until we're ready to mix, because the salt will kill the yeast. So we're going to put our bowl on our scales now, set it to 0, and we're going to weigh in 250 grams of plain flour. So I'm using a white flour here. You could use wholemeal plain flour if you wanted to be healthy, or you can use a bread flour. Any of them will work. Take the bowl off the scales so you don't damage your scales, and then just mix these ingredients together. So we're mixing the salt, the yeast and the sugar in with the flour now, like that, and then we're ready to add the water. Before we put the water in, we're going to put 1 tablespoon of oil in our bowl. So measure that out, 1 tablespoon. And then we're going to put the bowl back on the scales, set it to 0, and then put the warm water in. So if you've got a milliliter setting on your scales, you can choose it now, or use grams, it will weigh the same amount. And we want warm water because we want to activate the yeast. Not too hot because that will kill the yeast, and not too cold because the yeast won't start working. So that's perfect. So I'm going to add in 150 ml of warm water. There we are. Take my bowl off the scales, and then using a standard table knife like that, just going to mix everything together now. So coming around the edge of the bowl, bringing the dry ingredients into contact with the wet ingredients. Keep going like that until your dough comes together. You can see now that that's beginning to come together. It's just a little bit of dry flour at the bottom of the bowl. So clean the knife off on the edge of the bowl like that, and then use just one hand in the bowl to start forming your dough into a ball and picking up the dry ingredients on the bottom of the bowl like that. Put your dough onto the work surface, and now we're just going to knead it until it comes together. You'll feel it at the moment, it's very lumpy and it might be a little bit sticky. So I'm going to use the heel of my hand here. I'm going to pull the dough to the middle, and I'm going to push it away with the heel of my hand, rotate it 90 degrees, push it away, and just keep going until my dough ceases to be sticky and is nice and smooth. I'm having a little bit of trouble here. It's quite sticky, this dough. It's really sticking to my hand. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit of flour on the work surface, like that. Put a little bit on my hands, and that will just help me finish kneading off. That's much better now. I just needed a tiny bit more flour, and that's coming together beautifully now. So when we do this in school, we'd then get you to roll it out straight away and put it on your baking tray, but when you're at home you've got a little bit more time. So once your dough's ready, pop it back in your bowl and just leave it to start rising while you get the rest of your ingredients ready. So your recipe book asks you to bring in tomatoes or tomato puree or chopped tomatoes or a pizza sauce. So I've got a jar of pizza sauce here I'm going to use to add some flavour. I've got a block of 100 grams of cheddar that I'm going to grate on the large hole of the grater, like that. Keep your fingers well out of the way. When you come to the end of your block of cheese, get the little bits that have fallen down, just grate those properly. And then remember, you can put your fingers inside the grater to pull the cheese down, but don't run your fingers down the sharp edge. So that's my cheese. And then we ask you to bring 2 fillings of your own choice, but no raw meat. That's because the raw meat would need to be cooked. So if you want to use raw meat at home, say if you've got some bacon you want to use, then fry that before you add it to your ingredients on your board. I've just had a look in my fridge. I've got a few olives left over, so I'm going to put a few olives in my pizza. And I've also got some lovely sun-dried tomatoes, so I'm going to just tip a few of those out. And I'm going to chop them up, because I find if you put them in whole, when you bite into one, it's a bit tough and stringy. So I'm just going to dice those up or chop them like that, so that they're more pleasant on the palate. So other ingredients you could use, you might want to go for classic ham and pineapple, or you might want to do tuna. Tuna goes very well with peppers. I was trying to think of what else people bring in. Pancetta, you'd need to cook your pancetta first. You can use frozen sweet corn or a can of sweet corn. I'm going to clean my knife off with another one, so I don't want to put my finger anywhere near a blade. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to say that's one of my 2 ingredients. And I'm also going to add some meat here. So I've got a Spanish salami selection. I won't need all of that, but I'll put a few pieces of that on my Stromboli pizza. So now we're going to move on to rolling out our dough. So in order to roll out my dough, I need to just have a little bit of flour on my work surface to stop the dough sticking. I'm going to get my dough out of my bowl. It's had a chance to rise a little bit. Pop it on there, and we were aiming for a rectangular shape to fit on our baking tray. So we're not rolling around pizza like you'd buy from the supermarket. Remember, we're going for a rectangular shape. So your dough, because the gluten strands are working and lovely now, they're going to stretch a little bit when we roll, and then they will shrink back a little bit when you stop rolling. So you have to be quite patient, because you'll get it to the right size and then it will shrink again. Turn it round, roll it out a bit more, and just keep going until you've got a good size. You can see it's sticking to my rolling pin a little bit. I'm going to dust the top of it with flour. That will really help. See, it's not sticking anymore. Also stretch it out a little bit like that. There we are. I think that's okay. So now we're ready to add our toppings for our Stromboli. So the first thing we need to do is put our tomato paste or puree onto the base of our Stromboli pizza. So you don't want to have a dry pizza. Make sure you spread it not quite to the edges, because if you get it right at the edges, it's all going to kind of leak out while we're cooking. So like that, that should be okay. And then the next ingredient I'm going to put on is my cheese. So that's the other one that everybody would be using. Your grated cheese, like that. That's enough cheese. I'm going to put my sun-dried tomato and olive mix on next. Make sure you spread it evenly so that every slice of Stromboli gets every filling. Like that. then I'm just going to put a little bit of meat on. Just wipe my fingers. So this salami selection is already cooked, so that's why I can use that. So I'm going to use a couple of bits from each side or each row. That one's stuck together like that. Just have to be careful not to put too much filling in, because otherwise it won't roll properly. So it would be extra yummy but also extra messy. So I think that's enough. So the next job is to roll it up. So you take the edge furthest from you, this piece here, and just tuck it like that. I'm also going to tuck the edges over. We don't normally do this at school, but I read recently that it's a good idea and it will stop the filling coming out the edges. So I'm going to give that a go. So we'll see how that works. So I've got a frame shape now, but not this top edge. And I'm just going to gently roll it round. It's a bit hard to show you. You can see I'm pulling it towards myself. I'm working along the pizza from one end, middle, other end. And you just keep going until you've rolled it up completely, like that. So folding the edges in has worked quite well. That's keeping it contained. Then I'm going to get my baking tray with my parchment on, and I'm going to lift my pizza Stromboli onto my parchment. I'm going to keep the open edge underneath, or if it's not underneath for you, turn it so it's underneath, and that will stop the ingredients falling out. And then just pull it round like that until you get a crescent shape, and then we're going to put that in the oven. We'll just need to put a little bit of oil on it to glaze it before we put it in the oven, and that will give it a lovely golden colour. So I've got a little bit of olive oil here, and with a pastry brush or a bit of kitchen paper, if you haven't got a pastry brush, just give it a brush all the way over like that. That's going to go in the oven for between 25 and 30 minutes at 210 degrees or 190 fan. I just want to show you the back of mine. You can see where the raw edge is, so you can see the filling there, and that will leak out a little bit. I don't want you to think this is a perfect one and yours won't be, and we'll see what happens to it as it comes out of the oven. I've just taken my Stromboli out of the oven. It had 25 minutes to cook and it looks fine to me. You can see it's got a golden brown colour, and it has leaked a bit onto the baking parchment, but that's okay. That means that I can throw that bit away, and I've not got a horrible baking pan to wash up. So I'm just going to leave it a few minutes just to cool and kind of solidify a little bit, and then we can transfer it onto a board and cut it open and see what it looks like. So my Stromboli has been cooling for a few minutes, and I'm going to cut it open now, and hopefully we'll be able to see a rolled pattern inside. I'm going to cut it at a slight angle, like that. It's the moment of truth. There, and we can see we've got a rolled pizza. There's the other piece on the end. So I hope you enjoy that, and we look forward to seeing some pictures of your finished products, and also let us know which ingredients you used to personalise your Stromboli.